young Maid was working in a mansion for a multimillionaire man. One day, while she was cleaning the garden, found a strange boy hiding in the trees with a briefcase. She was froze when she saw inside. Emma Patterson had been working at the Blackwood estate for just over a year. At 26, she was grateful for the steady employment that Mr. Richard Blackwood provided, even if the man himself was cold and distant. The mansion sat on the outskirts of Burlington, Vermont, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to swallow all sound, except on this particular night. It started with a rustling outside her window. Emma had been given a small but comfortable room in the east wing of the mansion, close enough to respond to Mr. Blackwood's demands, but far enough to maintain the illusion of privacy. The sound came again, more deliberate this time, like someone carefully navigating through the underbrush. Emma's heart raced as she peered through the curtains. The security lights illuminated parts of the manicured lawn, but the shadows between the trees remained impenetrable. She considered calling Jackson, the security guard, but hesitated. False alarms had happened before, and Mr. Blackwood had made his displeasure clear on those occasions. "It's probably just a deer," she whispered to herself, though the rhythmic quality of the noise suggested otherwise. She checked the time. 2:17 a.m. Mr. Blackwood was away on business in Chicago until tomorrow evening. The rest of the staff, the cook, Mrs. Winters, and the groundskeeper, Mr. Delgado, had gone home hours ago. Emma decided to stay put. The mansion's security system was state-of-the-art, and she had been instructed never to leave her room after midnight unless summoned. Still, sleep eluded her as the noises continued intermittently until dawn, leaving her with a sense of unease that she couldn't shake. As the first light of morning filtered through her curtains, Emma rose from her restless bed and moved to the window. The garden below looked peaceful, too peaceful perhaps. A chair on the patio had been moved, and she could see what looked like footprints in the dewy grass, trailing toward the dense tree line. She shivered despite the warmth of her room. In her 13 months at the Blackwood estate, she had grown accustomed to the peculiarities of her employer, his sudden business trips, the locked rooms she was forbidden to clean, the late-night visitors escorted directly to his study. These were the eccentricities of the wealthy, she had told herself. But the footprints in the grass hinted at something else entirely. Emma showered and dressed quickly, pulling her chestnut hair into a neat ponytail. As she fastened her simple silver necklace, her mother's parting gift before Emma had left their small town in search of better opportunities, she made a decision. She would say nothing about the night's disturbances, at least not yet. Mr. Blackwood valued discretion above all else. It was the first rule he had impressed upon her during her initial interview. What happens within these walls remains within these walls. At the time, she had thought it a reasonable request from a man of his stature. Now, watching the rising sun illuminate the estate's immaculate grounds, she wondered what secrets those walls were keeping, and whether she truly wanted to know. Emma straightened her uniform and headed downstairs to begin her day, unaware that her life was about to change forever. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Emma went about her duties with extra care, hoping to compensate for her lack of sleep. By mid-afternoon, she was in the garden, pruning roses and collecting fallen leaves. The October air had a bite to it, and the trees surrounding the property blazed with autumn color. It was as she bent to retrieve a wayward branch that she saw him, a boy, no more than 14, crouched behind the large oak at the edge of the garden. He was thin, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and eyes that reminded her of someone she couldn't quite place. "Hello?" she called cautiously. "Are you lost?" boy startled, clearly prepared to run, but something in Emma's gentle tone made him hesitate. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said, his voice betraying a slight tremor. "I just need to see Richard Blackwood." "Mr. Blackwood isn't home right now," Emma explained, taking a step closer. "I'm Emma, one of the household staff. Can I help you with something?" The boy clutched a weathered briefcase to his chest. "My name is Tyler Hayes, and Richard Blackwood is my father." Emma felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. Mr. Blackwood had no children, at least none that anyone knew about. He was a confirmed bachelor who seemed to take pride in his solitude. "I think you might be mistaken," she began, but the boy was already shaking his head. "I'm not. My mom told me everything before she died last month. Cancer." His voice broke slightly. "She left me this." He indicated the briefcase. "Said it was my inheritance." As Tyler stepped out from behind the tree, Emma could suddenly see what had eluded her before. The same sharp jawline, the same peculiar set to his shoulders that characterized Mr. Blackwood. And those eyes, they were unmistakably the same shade of gray. The gardening shears in Emma's hand suddenly felt heavy. She placed them carefully on the ground, buying herself a moment to think. The mansion loomed behind her, its windows like watchful eyes. Jackson would be making his rounds soon. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low. "It's not safe." A flicker of defiance crossed Tyler's face. "I don't have anywhere else to go." The admission hung in the air between them. Emma noticed now what she had missed at first glance. The boy's clothes were clean but worn, his sneakers scuffed at the toes. There was a weariness about him that no 14-year-old should possess. "When did you arrive?" Emma asked, thinking of the noises from the previous night. "Yesterday evening," Tyler admitted. "I've been watching the house, trying to figure out when he'd be home." He shifted the briefcase from one hand to the other. "I hitched a ride from Boston. Took me 3 days." Emma's mind raced. If Tyler was telling the truth, and the resemblance to Mr. Blackwood was too striking to ignore, this situation was far more complicated than a simple trespasser. And if the contents of that briefcase were as important as the boy suggested, it could explain the unease she'd felt growing over her months of employment. The distant sound of a car engine made them both tense. Emma recognized the distinctive purr of Jackson's security vehicle beginning its perimeter check. "Come with me," she said, making a split-second decision that she hoped wouldn't cost her everything. "But stay quiet and do exactly as I say." Tyler nodded, his knuckles white around the handle of the briefcase. Emma led him through the garden's hidden service path, normally used by the groundskeepers to transport equipment without disturbing the estate's aesthetic. The narrow dirt trail wound behind hedges and stone walls, eventually connecting to the back entrance of the kitchen. "Mrs. Winters won't be back until tomorrow," Emma explained as she ushered Tyler through the door, checking over her shoulder for any signs of Jackson. "We need to get you inside before anyone sees you." The kitchen was immaculate. Mrs. Winters ran her domain with military precision and eerily quiet without the usual clattering of pots and pans. Emma gestured for Tyler to sit at the small staff table in the corner while she quickly poured him a glass of water. He drank gratefully, still clutching the briefcase on his lap. "You're taking a big risk," he said after a moment, studying her with eyes too perceptive for his age. Emma nodded, the truth of his words settling uncomfortably on her shoulders. "Yes," she admitted, "but so are you." Outside, Jackson's vehicle rumbled past the kitchen windows. Emma held her breath until the sound faded. "Mr. Blackwood is returning tonight," she said finally. "What exactly were you planning to do when you met him?" Tyler's expression hardened, a glimpse of the man he might one day become. "Make him acknowledge me, and then make him pay for what he's done." The conviction in his voice sent a chill down Emma's spine. Whatever was in that briefcase, she was now irrevocably involved. Emma made a decision that would change everything. Rather than calling security, she brought Tyler to her quarters, offering him sandwiches and hot chocolate while he told his story. His mother, Melissa Hayes, had met Richard Blackwood 14 years ago at a bar in Boston. She was a law student then, working nights to pay for school. Their affair was brief but intense. When she discovered she was pregnant, Richard had paid her a substantial sum to disappear, with the understanding that she would never contact him again. "Mom kept her word," Tyler explained, "until she got sick. Then she started putting this together." He carefully opened the briefcase, revealing meticulously organized files, USB drives, and handwritten notes. Emma was stunned by what she saw. The documents detailed years of fraudulent business practices, tax evasion, and what appeared to be evidence of money laundering through Blackwood's numerous shell companies. There were photos of Richard with known criminals, transcripts of damning conversations, and financial records that painted a picture of corruption on a massive scale. "Mom was finishing her law degree when they met," Tyler explained, his young face grave beyond his years. "She kept tabs on him over the years, collecting information. She said it was her insurance policy, but she never used it until now. She wanted me to have what's rightfully mine." Emma's mind raced. If these allegations were true, then she had been working for a criminal all this time. The extravagant lifestyle, the mysterious business trips, the late-night visitors who were ushered into Mr. Blackwood's study, it all suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. "What are you planning to do with this?" she asked Tyler, although she already knew the answer. "I want him to recognize me as his son," Tyler said simply. "And I want him to face consequences for what he's done. Mom died in a county hospital because we couldn't afford better care, while he lives like this." He gestured at the opulent surroundings. As night fell, Emma heard the distant sound of a car approaching. Mr. Blackwood was returning earlier than expected. Emma moved quickly to the window, parting the curtains just enough to confirm her fears. The sleek black Bentley was gliding up the long driveway, its headlights cutting through the twilight like searching eyes. "We need to hide these," she whispered, helping Tyler gather the scattered documents. Her hands trembled as she slid papers back into folders, her mind still reeling from what she had seen. Names of offshore accounts, photographs of handshakes with men whose faces she recognized from news reports about organized crime, a spreadsheet detailing payments to government officials. "There's more," Tyler said, pulling out a small leather-bound journal from a hidden compartment in the briefcase. "This is Mom's diary. She documented everything. Dates, conversations, places. She was thorough." Emma took the journal, flipping through pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. Melissa Hayes had been methodical in her documentation, noting each interaction with Blackwood, each suspicious transaction she had uncovered. "How did she get all this?" Emma asked, awestruck by the extensive evidence. Tyler's expression darkened. "She was smart, really smart. After I was born, she finished law school anyway, took night classes while working days, ended up specializing in financial crimes. She never confronted him directly, but she kept building this case." His voice faltered. Said it was my inheritance. The truth. The sound of doors closing downstairs jolted them back to the immediate danger. Mr. Blackwood doesn't come to this part of the house often, Emma said, her voice low. But we can't risk staying here. There's a service corridor that leads to the old servants' quarters in the north wing. Nobody uses them anymore. She helped Tyler pack the briefcase, making sure everything was secure. The weight of what they were doing, hiding evidence, harboring the unacknowledged son of her employer, pressed down on her with each passing second. As they prepared to leave, Emma noticed a photograph that had fallen to the floor. It showed a younger Melissa Hayes, her smile bright and confident, arm in arm with a man Emma recognized immediately as Richard Blackwood. He looked different, younger, less hardened, but his signature cold confidence was unmistakable. Your mother was beautiful, Emma said softly, handing the photo to Tyler. He took it gently, his fingers tracing his mother's face. She was the strongest person I knew, even at the end, when the pain was, when it was bad. She made sure I knew what to do. The sound of footsteps on the main staircase sent a jolt of fear through Emma. We need to go. Now. They slipped into the hallway, the briefcase between them like a ticking bomb. The service corridor was accessed through an unassuming door that most visitors mistook for a closet. Emma led Tyler through it, into the narrow passageway that smelled of dust and forgotten history. Watch your step, she whispered as they made their way through the dimly lit corridor. Some of the floorboards are loose. Behind them, Emma could hear Blackwood's voice drifting up from the main floor, sharp and irritated as he barked orders at someone. Probably Jackson, given the mumbled responses. The north wing was the oldest part of the mansion, a relic from the original construction that had been preserved more out of obligation to history than any real appreciation for it. The servants' quarters consisted of 6 small rooms, now used primarily for storage. We'll stay here tonight, Emma said, choosing the room farthest from the main house. In the morning, I'll bring food and we can figure out our next steps. Tyler nodded, setting the briefcase carefully on a dusty table. In the weak light filtering through the grime-covered windows, he looked even younger, the weight of his situation etched in the tense set of his shoulders. He won't get away with it, he said, more to himself than to Emma. Mom made sure of that. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The evidence in the briefcase wasn't just damning, it was dangerous. The kind of information that people killed to protect. I'll get some rest, she told Tyler, knowing sleep would elude them both. Tomorrow, we'll decide what to do. But as she made her way back to her quarters, careful to avoid the main halls where Blackwood might be prowling, Emma already knew that their options were limited, and whatever choice they made would come with consequences neither of them could fully predict. Emma's thoughts were a tempest as she helped Tyler hide in the old groundskeeper's cottage at the edge of the property. Mr. Blackwood would never go there. He considered it beneath his notice. For 3 days, she secretly brought food and supplies to Tyler while she wrestled with her conscience. She had reviewed more of the evidence, and there was no denying its authenticity. Richard Blackwood wasn't just wealthy. He was a criminal whose actions had hurt countless people. But Emma was afraid. She had witnessed Mr. Blackwood's temper, had seen how he treated those who crossed him. Going against him meant risking everything, her job, her safety, perhaps even her life. On the 4th night, she made her decision. After ensuring that Tyler was safely hidden, Emma drove to the Burlington Police Department. Her hands trembled as she asked to speak with Detective Sarah Martinez, whom she had once met at a community event. "I need to report a crime," Emma said, her voice steadier than she expected. "And I need protection for a minor who has evidence against Richard Blackwood." Detective Martinez's expression changed at the mention of Blackwood's name. "We've been looking into his operations for years," she admitted, "but we've never had enough to move forward." "I think that's about to change," Emma replied, thinking of Tyler and his briefcase full of secrets. What followed was a whirlwind of statements, evidence cataloging, and arrangements for Tyler's safety. The FBI became involved due to the interstate nature of Blackwood's crimes. Emma learned that there was already an ongoing investigation. Tyler's evidence was the missing piece they had been waiting for. When Richard Blackwood was arrested 3 weeks later, the news made national headlines. Emma watched from the window of a safe house as the man she had served for years was led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him. Tyler, now in the care of his maternal grandmother, was granted a substantial settlement from Blackwood's assets. He visited Emma occasionally, their shared experience having forged an unlikely bond. "You didn't have to help me," he said during one such visit. "You could have just called security that day in the garden." Emma smiled, thinking about the complex chain of events that had led them here. "Some choices aren't really choices at all," she replied. "Not when you know what's right." As winter gave way to spring, Emma started nursing school, something she had always dreamed of but never thought possible. The path ahead wasn't easy, but it was honest. And in the end, that made all the difference. The night before Emma went to the police had been the longest of her life. She sat in her room, a small bag packed with essentials beside her bed, watching the minutes tick by on her bedside clock. The mansion creaked and settled around her, sounds she once found comforting now seeming ominous. Mr. Blackwood had been particularly tense that day, pacing his study while barking orders into his phone. Twice Emma had caught him watching her with narrowed eyes as she went about her duties. Had he noticed her frequent disappearances to check on Tyler? Did he suspect something was amiss? At 2:17 a.m., exactly the time she had heard the noises in the garden 4 nights earlier, Emma made her final decision. She reached for her phone and dialed her sister Kate in Albany. "I need you to do something for me," she whispered when Kate answered, groggy with sleep. "If you don't hear from me by tomorrow night, I need you to call this number." She recited Detective Martinez's card information, which she had kept since that community event 6 months ago. "Emma, what's going on?" Kate's voice was sharp with concern. "Are you in trouble?" "I hope not," Emma replied. "But I'm about to do something difficult. The right thing, but difficult." After ending the call, Emma slipped out to the groundskeeper's cottage one final time. Tyler was awake, as she knew he would be, sitting at the small table with the contents of his mother's briefcase spread before him. "I'm going to the police tomorrow," she told him without preamble. "But I need you to stay here until I come back with them. It's not safe for you to be seen." Tyler looked up, his gray eyes so like his father's yet so different in their warmth, studying her face. "You could lose everything." "I already decided that I can't live with myself if I don't do this," Emma said, surprising herself with her own certainty. "Your mother spent years collecting this evidence. She believed in justice. So do I." The next morning, Emma went about her duties as normally as possible, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She cleaned the main parlor, dusted the library shelves, and even prepared Mr. Blackwood's favorite tea when he requested it at noon. "You seem distracted today, Emma," he remarked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Just thinking about some personal matters, sir," she replied, keeping her voice even. "My sister's birthday is coming up." He seemed satisfied with the explanation, returning to his newspaper. Emma retreated to the kitchen, where she took a moment to steady her breathing. 4 more hours until her shift ended. 4 more hours until she could leave the estate and drive to the police station. When the time finally came, she changed out of her uniform into plain clothes, told Mrs. Winters she wasn't feeling well, and walked calmly to her car. Every step felt like a declaration of intent. Every breath, a silent promise to the boy waiting in the cottage. Detective Sarah Martinez was initially skeptical when Emma walked into the precinct, but as Emma began to outline what she had seen and what Tyler had shown her, the detective's demeanor changed. "We need to move quickly," Martinez said after Emma finished her account. "If Blackwood suspects anything, the boy could be in danger." Within hours, a carefully orchestrated operation was underway. Tyler was safely extracted from the groundskeeper's cottage while Blackwood was occupied with business associates in his study. The briefcase and its damning contents were secured as evidence. Emma and Tyler spent that night in separate safe houses, protected by officers who revealed that the FBI had been building a case against Blackwood for years. Tyler's evidence, meticulously gathered by his mother, was the key that unlocked everything else. The weeks that followed were a blur of depositions, interviews, and court appearances. Emma learned that her employment at the Blackwood estate had coincided with the most intense period of the FBI's investigation. Unwittingly, she had been a witness to the final stages of Blackwood's criminal enterprise. "You were brave," Agent Lisa Reynolds told her during one debriefing session. "Most people would have looked the other way." "I couldn't," Emma replied simply. "Not after I saw his son." The day of Blackwood's arrest, Emma watched from the window of a nondescript apartment across town as news helicopters circled the mansion. The footage played on every channel. Richard Blackwood, his face a mask of cold fury, being escorted from his home in handcuffs. The reporters spoke of offshore accounts, bribes to government officials, connections to organized crime, and money laundering on a massive scale. None mentioned the quiet determination of a dying mother or the courage of her 14-year-old son. 6 months later, as Emma settled into her new life as a nursing student, funded in part by a reward from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, she received a letter. Inside was a photograph of Tyler, standing next to an older woman with kind eyes, his grandmother, in front of a modest but well-kept house. "We're doing okay," the note read in Tyler's careful handwriting. "Grandma says to thank you for everything. The lawyers say I'll get a trust fund when I turn 18 from the settlement. I'm thinking about law school, like Mom." At the bottom, he had added, "You had a choice. Thank you for making the right one." Emma pinned the photo to her bulletin board, next to her class schedule and hospital rotation assignments. Some days, when the coursework seemed overwhelming or the hospital shifts too grueling, she would look at it and remember. There were moments in life that defined a person, crossroads where the easy path and the right path diverged. Emma had faced such a moment in a garden on an autumn afternoon, and again in a police station on a cool evening. She had chosen right both times, and that, she knew with quiet certainty, would make all the difference in the life that stretched before her now. A life built on courage, integrity, and the simple, powerful belief that justice mattered.